Yesenia Sanchez.
Okay. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm so happy to be here, and thank you so much, Claudine, for inviting me. So I want to start first by saying yes. So, how I identify is I identify as, I would say for myself, like a holistic coach. And so for me, that means everything. That's life, that's business, that's, the finances. And I am a holistic sex educator as well. So I have a very holistic view of life. And also, I'm spiritually oriented. And so for me, that really is a part also too of what I bring into my work, though I'm not religious. So again, spirituality also has a very broad definition to me. And I'll take it back to what Claudine said. For me, it's all about living your highest potential, like living the true, authentic, powerful you. And how do you do that in real time, like in the real world? Setting boundaries and having our boundaries crossed can really, really impact how powerful we feel and how we bring that power into the world. So we're going to talk about boundaries. And, this was an image that I found that I really liked. And I was like, wow, I had this kind of visceral reaction to it of like, it would be so nice to do that. Sometimes to just kind of like, this is my space, right? Not just physically, but also just energetically, emotionally, to have it be that clear, right? And the truth is that it really, it often isn't. It isn't that defined, right? Like people aren't seeing this whole line around you. They're interacting with you in lots of different ways. So let's look at, just boundaries is a word that we hear a lot, but let's look at some different types of boundaries that we might mean. So, there's the idea of boundaries is that you have the right to your experience, your thoughts, your feelings, your own individuality of what works for you and what doesn't. So we start there with everyone has their parameters, their places where their edges. We all have that, and we all have the right to be able to, when someone goes beyond that in a way that doesn't feel good to us, we have a right to be able to communicate that, to say no, to say yes. That's our right. Okay. And here are some of the ways that might show up in terms of crossed boundaries, or things that what you can identify as boundaries. So first we have the physical. So like that, that image. So physical space, just your personal space, who can touch your body, when and how they may touch you. A little bit of a funny story, but kind of not. Like I lived in Hawaii for a few years. And one of the things that I was really surprised at when I lived in Hawaii was that even in business interactions, people would kiss me. It was like the spirit of aloha was such a beautiful spirit. And physically, for me, just in who I am, like, I don't like that. And so that was a little bit of it was tricky for me to try to see how I could have that conversation, to not hug and to not kiss. So that was a boundary that I actually didn't know that I had until everybody started kissing me, right? And then it was like, oh, I don't like that. So material, this is one that we don't necessarily think about in terms of boundaries, but, you have the right to your own finances and your things, and who can touch your things, take your things, your permission around your things. Those are boundaries. That's what material boundaries are. Emotional boundaries. So this is one that I think that we can often be very familiar with when we talk about boundary work. Emotional boundaries. And this one gets a little tricky, right? Because you get to define what that means. And it's one of those things sometimes when we're looking at how to set boundaries, we may not necessarily know that there was a boundary there until it was crossed, kind of like my Hawaii story, right? And so, our emotions, being mindful of ourself and listening and feeling our own emotions then helps us to communicate when our emotional boundaries are crossed, right? And time, this is one that I think in today's world, like our boundaries around time, and just because we live in such an active, stimuli type of world, just even defining some boundaries around your time, like your personal time, like protecting. As a coach, I talk a lot with people around protecting their time and their space for their self-care, right? And putting a boundary, like, this is actually my space, my time, and I don't just give it away, and you can't just assume that, or take my time in that way. And then here, this is some of the most intense kind of boundary setting that we do, both in sexuality and in our relationships, right? And so, in our sexuality, we have the right to define our sexual boundaries. And for some of us that have a lived experience that we didn't get choice around that, that work becomes really important, that we that we care for ourselves in that way, and we learn what that means for us, because that may not naturally be something that we do know because of our lived experience. And in relationships, the same thing. Our formative relationships that we've seen, the relationships that we've been in, really define how we look at our own boundaries. So I was saying before, you have the right to your experience and your boundaries. So this means that you have the right to your no's and your yeses. Okay. And, generally, we have less problems with the yeses. So we're going to focus a little bit on the no's, right? And the how do we have a communication around a no or a boundary that has been crossed. So I don't know, is there anybody, have you all heard of nonviolent communication, NVC? Anybody familiar with that? Okay, cool. So I'm going to introduce you to it's one of the most helpful communication tools that I have experienced in my work in coaching. So NVC, you could go deeper into it, but it's a very simple tool. And we're going to start with the left-hand side. These are the principles of nonviolent communication that you can use in any kind of situation to communicate a no, or in any kind of confrontation. So the first one is that the first principle of NVC is that you observe the situation. So if we go over to the other side, the when you, okay? So I'm going to give an example. The other day, when you this is kind of, when you ate my peanut butter, the other day, when you ate my peanut butter, see, very simple. What happened? You ate my peanut butter. I'm observing that, right? So when you ate my peanut butter, principle 2, identify your thoughts and feelings that came up from the situation. I have 2 of these here. Number 2 and 3 are your thoughts and your feelings. So when you ate my peanut butter, I took it as you taking something that was mine, and it made me feel disrespected. Okay. Now, the principle 3 is that then you identify your needs. So when you took my peanut butter, I took it as you taking something of mine. It made me feel disrespected. And next time, I need for you to ask me to eat my peanut butter, if you would like some peanut butter. Okay. And the fourth one is really important. This is a question. You give people a question. You express a clear request that will make your life better. So we'll go through the whole thing. When you ate my peanut butter, I took it as you taking something of mine. It made me feel disrespected. And next time, I need for you to ask before you eat my peanut butter, would you do that? Will you do that? Can you do that? Right? So if you see here, it's a very simple, like, the reason why it's called nonviolent, because you're not accusing somebody, you're not angry, you're stating the situation, right? You're stating your boundary. That peanut butter was mine. And I have a problem with you eating the peanut butter. And here's what I would like instead to happen. Okay. So this is something that you can use. This communication tool is one that I can speak for myself and say, I have used this in so many ways. Everything from, you've taken the peanut butter to, things happening in relationships that really hurt me. It's applicable because if you look at it, what you're doing is you're really giving an opportunity for a resolution to happen that you want. You're really giving an opportunity for peace to happen, of like, hey, you crossed my boundaries and I need for you, this is what I need. And will you agree to that?
And one comment that was made in the chat from Leilani and Alana, that they said that it's not difficult to do this, but the issue is with other people and their responses and like being respectful or making them feel guilty.
Yeah, exactly. So here's why we're going to do a little exercise around it, because the more that you practice it, like this is how you actually then can learn how to take what's coming back at you. But if you don't practice it, then you don't communicate that a boundary has been crossed, right? And two, you don't then learn. You don't learn how to, there's the saying, actually, in boundary work, the first thing is, oh, a boundary has been crossed. The second is communication. This boundary has been crossed. And then the third is the resolution and, where it meets the world, the practice of that, the reality of that. And for that full cycle to happen, it is boundary work. It is practice in doing that. So thank you, Leilani and Lana, for that, because that's real. Like, that's for real, right? Like, once this hits the world, it's like, oh yeah, that's right. We're practicing this, but people are going to be talking back, right? So it becomes then about, I don't like this word because it feels a little too intense to me, but like enforcing that boundary. Let's say standing in it. Let's say that once you've communicated, then it becomes like, you can communicate it, and sometimes you get all wobbly around it of like, well, maybe I didn't. You start to kind of back because you're scared or, many different reasons. So the practicing helps us to kind of breathe and stay in that boundary setting work. Okay.